Hi, I'm Kelsey from Crafting for Weeks, and today I'm going to be showing you the applied I-cord and an I-cord handle. So today I'm going to be working on the Ocean's Breath market bag, and I'm going to show you how to do this I-cord handle and edging. You can use this concept on any bag. Okay, so to start, I'm going to lay my bag flat, and I'm going to put stitch markers where I want my handle drop to go. So on this bag I have 15 stitches on each side, and there's 34 stitches in the center where I'm going to skip for the drop. Now my seam starts just a couple stitches over from that first stitch marker. Okay, so you are going to need a knitting needle or a cable needle to do this. Right here I just have a needle from an interchangeable set, and I just took the cord off. So we are going to start by chaining 3. So I have 3 chains, and then I'm going to pull up a loop in the second chain from my hook and the third chain from my hook. So now I have 3 loops on my hook. Okay, so now you're going to go to your first stitch. You're going to pull up a loop in that first stitch. So there should be 4 loops on your hook now. So this is where you're going to need that needle. You're going to take your needle and you're going to slide 3 loops off of your hook. Now this is a little fiddly at first, so just hang in there. You'll get the hang of it. So once you have those 3 loops on the knitting needle, you are going to take your hook and you're just going to slip stitch. After you do that first slip stitch, you're going to slide your next loop off of the needle and back onto your hook. Again, I said it's a little fiddly at first. You will get the hang of it. And there we go. And then you're going to slip stitch in that next loop. So we'll pull that one through. So we have 2 loops on our hook. Now we're going to slide the last 2 loops off together and back onto the hook and slip stitch through both of those loops. All right, so we're back down to 3 loops on the hook. We're going to go to our next stitch and pull up a loop. And now we have 4 loops on our hook again. So we're going to just repeat that process. We're going to slip 3 stitches off. And you want to pay attention to your tension just a little bit so your stitches don't get too loose. All right, we've slipped 3. We're going to slip stitch in the first loop, and then we're going to slide that next loop back onto our hook. And there we go. And we're going to slip stitch in that loop, and then we're going to slide the next 2 stitches off together onto our hook, and we're going to slip stitch through both. All right, onto our next stitch. We're going to pull up a loop in the next stitch, and I will show you just one more time so you can get a feel for how it looks. Okay, so start by sliding those loops over onto your knitting needle, and you can also do this with like a cable needle if you'd like. Okay, slip stitch in the first, slide your next one over, slip stitch in the second, and then slide your last 2 over, and you're going to slip stitch through both of them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this edge section. So I'm going to work all the way to my first stitch marker, and I will meet you there to show you what to do next. Okay, so I have finished my edge section, and I am about to pull up a loop in my last stitch. This is the stitch with the stitch marker in it. So I'm going to pull up a loop there, slide my loops over, and I'm going to do slip stitches in each of those loops, same way that I did across with the applied I-cord edge. I'm going to slide 2 loops over and slip stitch. Okay, so since this is where my drop goes for my handle, I'm going to skip these stitches. What I'm going to do instead of pulling up a loop in my next stitch, I'm just going to slide 2 loops onto my needle. And then I'm going to slip stitch in the first, slide 1 over, slip stitch in the second, slide the last one over, slip stitch in the third. Okay, so I'm just going to continue doing that. Instead of pulling up a loop in my next stitch, I'm just going to work with 3 loops on my hook instead of 4. Now this is basically a standard I-cord at this point. If you prefer, you can do these with a knitting needle if you have double pointed knitting needles, or you can just continue to do this with your crochet hook. Now for this pattern, I'm going to keep going until this is 18 inches long, and then I will meet you on the other side to show you how to anchor it again. Okay, so real quick, while you're working on your I-cord handle, this is a little trick to speed it up. You can actually just pinch the base of these stitches and skip the knitting needle for the I-cord. I recommend using the needle when you're doing the applied edge, but for the I-cord handle itself, it's pretty easy to just pinch the base of those stitches. Okay, so my handle is 18 inches long now, and I still have 3 loops on my hook from my last stitches. So what I'm going to do is find that stitch with the stitch marker in it, and I'm going to pull up a loop in that stitch. And then once I do that, I'm basically just working the same process with slipping my stitches onto the needle that I was doing for the opposite edge. So starting back from the handle to the edge is pretty simple. You just pull up a loop in whichever stitch you need to start the edging back in. Okay, so I slipped those stitches, and now I'm going to do a slip stitch in each of those loops. I'm going to slide this loop over, do a slip stitch, and slide the last 2 back onto my hook, and slip stitch through both. And that has anchored my handle to that stitch, and now I'm just going to continue working in my stitches along the edge. So I'm going to work all the way to the next stitch marker, and then I'm going to do another handle the exact same way I did my first one. So I'm going to meet you all the way at the first edge so I can show you how to finish off. Okay, so I finished my second handle, and I'm going to anchor it into that marked stitch the same way that I did the last handle, where I'm pulling up a loop in that next stitch and then sliding my loops onto a needle. So I'm going to slide 3 loops over. I'm going to slip stitch in the first, slide my next loop over, and then I'm going to slip stitch in the second. There we go, slip stitch in the second, and slide the last 2 over and slip stitch through both. Okay, I've got 1 stitch left, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull up a loop and repeat that process in my last stitch. So I slid 3 loops over, going to slip stitch, slide 1 loop over, there we go, and slip stitch, and slide my last 2 over and slip stitch. Okay, so here's where it's a little bit different. I'm going to finish it off. Just loosening the tension a little bit in those last stitches. I'm going to slide 1 loop, then I'm going to slip this second loop through the first loop. Okay, and then I'm going to slide that loop back on, and I'm going to slip it. All right, I just have 1 loop on my hook, and I'm actually just going to anchor it right to the base of that first stitch. And I'm going to slip stitch. I'm going to pull it through, and I am just going to pull my yarn through so I can finish off. Now here, you just have a little bit of a gap right there between the start and end. You are going to take a tapestry needle and you are basically just going to, secure your knot first. And then you're going to just take that tail and you're kind of just going to sew the end of each I-cord to each other to just make it as discreet as possible. Now, I didn't do this any specific sort of way. I just kind of stitched it together. Then I'm going to put a few stitches in the back and just weave this in. Once you feel like it's secure, just tie it off, weave that tail in, and snip whatever you have left. And at that point, you're really just pulling out those stitch markers and finishing up your bag. Now, you can find the pattern for this particular bag on my blog, craftingforweeks.com. And you can also use this I-cord handle and edging for pretty much any tote bag you want. The I-cord is pretty sturdy. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Find more at craftingforweeks.com.